So welcome all to this fifth New Perspectives webinar on the spiritual essence of religions and their role in the future development of mankind. And in this series, for those of you that have been joining us on this journey, we have examined Avesta, the Rig Veda, Upanishads, Gita, Buddhism, and Jainism to date. And with us here today to address Christianity and its contributions to integral yoga is Jared Quek, who is joining us from Singapore. Welcome, Jared. We know it's late in Singapore, so we always appreciate you joining us in the evening and accommodating this time for our attendees and us. And I'll have to say there is truly no one more appropriate to discuss this topic on Christianity and integral yoga than Jared, as he's practiced Sri Aurobindo's and the Mother's integral yoga in conjunction with his Christian faith for over 20 years. So I'm Rade, and I'm joined by Vladimir, and we are both with the LaGrasse Sri Aurobindo Integral Life Center in Fountain Inn. And today in his talk, Jared will explore the spiritual resonance between the profound teachings of Sri Aurobindo and Christianity's timeless wisdom. Jared dives first into love's transformative power and its role as a central energy in both paths that moves all creation to liberty and consummation. Then he'll examine the role of the body and matter in serving as ever-evolving vessels of the divine. Jared's discussion culminates with the intriguing Christian concept of the incarnation and the descent of the spirit. These will be contemplated in the light of the supramental descent and transformation that Sri Aurobindo and the Mother worked on for, and he'll highlight the harmonious intersections and seeming diversions. So most of you already know Jared, but let me do just a brief introduction. He does hold 2 postgraduate degrees from the University of Oxford, specializing in Indian philosophy, Christian theology, and business administration. And he works in the education sector and invests in technology company. As many of you may know, Jared has been a frequent guest speaker on New Perspectives, addressing such interesting and captivating topics as Western transhumanism and Sri Aurobindo's integral thought, the coming age of mental subjectivism, and the double foundation of yoga. He is also engaged in some very fascinating work in the AI field. Perhaps he will give us a sneak preview of one of the projects he's involved with. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you, Jared, and just remind everybody who are joining us at this time to post any questions that you have for Jared in the Q&A box, and there'll definitely be time at the end for him to address the questions. So again, Jared, welcome, and handing it over to you.
Thank you, Rade. Can you hear me clearly?
Yes, perfect.
Yes. You can see the... Okay, this is looking weird.
It's a little, half of it's cut off. You have a large heading.
Can you see the slides?
Perfect.
Okay, great. Okay, so good morning, everyone, or to evening, and those in India, or maybe from Singapore. So today is really sharing very close to my heart. It's something I guess I've engaged in for a whole lifetime, which is to walk the path of Sri Aurobindo and to hold the hands and to hear the call of Christ at the same time. It has been actually maybe a 30 years journey, what one would say, since my early teenage years when I first knew Christ, but I was never fully satisfied, should we say, with the very conventional view or dogma that was in Christianity. Yeah, at the same time, I feel the presence of Christ, its attraction, and later on of the Virgin Mary. So, and yet at the same time, I discovered Sri Aurobindo when I was in university in the UK, and I never left him since then. So somehow it has been a journey, which is not an intellectual one, primarily, interestingly, even though I supposedly have degrees in theology and blah, 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 but it's really an experiential journey, because that means it is a living journey. It's how to be faithful to I wouldn't even know the right word is both of them, but basically be faithful. Yeah, I think that's the correct way to put it, to be faithful and to walk this path, which is somehow a synthesis of both, of Christ, of Sri Aurobindo, without at the same time diluting or engaging in some kind of superficial syncretism. So today's sharing is really not a journey, should we say, in logos, but in mythos. That means I'm not going to propound some syncretic philosophy that I worked out over the years. I don't think that's helpful, nor can it be done like that. There are far too many intellectual divergences between the two paths. It is perfectly pointless, in my opinion, to try to put them together in some syncretic philosophical way. It's also not authentic. Maybe at some day, I think whatever reconciliation is sought, it lies beyond the mind and within the psychic being, I would say. So today we are going to go on a journey of symbols, of mythology, so to speak, so that we can experience for ourselves, experience, not to think necessarily, the how the two intersect. So as I say, this is really a sharing from my own personal journey. Therefore, it obviously only represents one aspect of this very vast ocean that a number of people are definitely moving on. So if there are Q&A later on that, we can have a more interesting discussion. Okay, so I would start, I hope everyone can see, with, since we are talking about mythos, we will share this story that the mother told about the four emanations, which I think many of you are very familiar with, but I will just read it out again, because I think the story will sum up quite completely. I think I'll make it bigger. Quite completely everything that, all the main themes that I'm going to talk about later. Yeah. So this story begins when some children ask the mother, where do the gods come from, right? And the mother basically said,
Jared, that's a little hard to see. We've got the top heading very big again.
Yes. I was trying to blow up the font. Okay. Is it back? Okay. So the mother was saying, one day, God decided to put him forth to objectify himself in order to have the joy of knowing himself in detail. So at first, he emanated his consciousness, instructing it to bring to being a universe. This consciousness began by emanating four beings, four individualities, who really were wholly superior beings of the highest reality. They were the being of consciousness, the being of love, or rather of Ananda, the being of life, and the being of light and knowledge. But consciousness and light are the same thing. We have consciousness, love, and Ananda, life and truth. That's the right word, truth. Okay. Sorry, this is being blocked by the top part was being blocked by the Zoom. Okay, so I think I'll read the first paragraph from here. And of course, they were supremely powerful beings. You can well imagine. In this law, they are called the first emanations. In other words, the first formations. But each one became very much aware of its quality, its power, its capacity, and its possibility, and at once forgot in its own way it was only an emanation or incarnation of the Supreme. When light or consciousness separated itself from the divine consciousness, that is, when it began to think itself as the divine consciousness and there was nothing else than itself, suddenly it became darkness and unconsciousness. And when life thought that the whole life was in itself and there was no other life than its own, and that it was not at all dependent on the Supreme, then life became death. And when truth thought it contained the whole truth and there was no other truth but itself, this truth became falsehood. And when love or Ananda was convinced that it itself was the supreme Ananda, that there was nothing else than itself and its bliss, it became suffering. That is how the world that ought to have been so beautiful became so ugly. So I cut short a little. Then from the divine came an emanation of love. In the first emanation, it wasn't love. It was Ananda, bliss, the delight of being, which became suffering. And from the supreme came love. And love descended into this domain of inconscience. Simultaneously with the creation of the gods, then came this first descent of love into matter, without passing through all the intermediate world. That's the story of the first descent. The divine love descended straight from the Lord into matter and began to awaken what was involved there. So we begin this sharing with this beautiful parable, should we say, of the descent of love, the highest, most supreme power into matter. And it is this descent of love into matter that sets into motion, shall we say, the redemption, the redemptive story from the beginning, to conquer back the darkness from the great four fallen asuras, to turn the whole of creation back into the arms and the embrace of the Divine Mother. So love really is at the beginning and to some degree the end of creation. Sri Aurobindo puts it in the synthesis of yoga, love and Ananda are the mystery of mysteries. Yeah, it's the heart of the whole matter. Even as we talk about the supramental descent in Sri Aurobindo's teaching, the descent of the supramental truth prepares the descent of the supramental love. It is only with the truth that the love can come, but love is the crown, actually, as it is in the beginning. So with this beautiful story, let us connect it over to what we know, many of us know, in Christianity. But of course, we are not talking about love in a superficial, social sense of the word. It's not love in the sense of just philanthropy, love in the sense of simple human fellowship, which is often the case in, unfortunately, sometimes in external Christian circles, right? But if you look at what the words of Christ himself is, you will realize this love is love. I mean, the scripture, the third one is not, the first one is not actually directly the words of Christ. It's the words of John, the disciple. So, but if you look at it, it's a much deeper layer of love we are talking about. So from the letter of John, one of the closest disciple of Christ in a way, who supposedly put his head on the chest of Christ in the Last Supper, whoever does not love does not know God, because God is love. And the second one, where Christ commanded in his during the night before his crucifixion, this is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. And the third one, that they may all be one, as you, Father, are in me, and I in you, and that they also may be in us, so that the world may believe that you have sent me. So these are immeasurably profound things, and volumes after volumes for 2,000 years, people have spilled much ink on them, and still we have not exhausted their wisdom. But we can see at least three aspects here, right? The first is that God himself is love. This is talking about God as love, divine love himself. Quite possibly that same love that came in the beginning, as the mother puts it. The love that came from the supreme and touched matter directly. And from that supreme aspect, perhaps, came forth this, should we say, individual love, or perhaps a kind of psychic love, as Sri Aurobindo might put it, united with the divine love. This is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. So what Jesus demanded of his disciple is to incarnate his love. So it's not that kind of, egoistic love that we normally talk about. And this clearly aligns very well with what Sri Aurobindo and the Mother always teaches. The kind of love that transcends ego. You cannot love as Christ loved you unless you realize what's the context, because he is going to give himself up the next day and die on the cross, right? And so he will carry that love to the last minute of his earthly life. So this love that is demanded is clearly is no mere human love, but a complete divine love. But at the same time, it is an individual love, that you love one another as I have loved you. To me, it really sounds like the psychic love, the deepest love that humans on our individual level, shall we say, is capable of. But unified, empowered by the grace of the divine love that comes from above. And the third shows this maybe cosmic aspect or this oneness aspect, that they may all be one as you, Father, are in me and I in you, that they also may be in us, so that the world may believe that you have sent me. This probably echoes some of the Upanishads for those who are familiar. And although this views this idea of oneness in the should we say, from the angle of love. How is love that brings about this oneness in diversity, where one does not loses one's individuality, but keeps one's individuality, but unites the transcendent Father with the Son and with all of us. That's the power of love. So whatever this love is, if you just look at these three things, it's something immeasurably profound. And it's not something that the church or Christians in general have lived out. We must admit that, right? I have not lived it out. And throughout Christian history, which has been stained by blood and many things which we need not go into, where is this love? That is an important question. Perhaps, as we say, as we actually understand, even in the church itself, this love will only find its consummation in the future. In Sri Aurobindo's term, it is the supramental truth that makes possible this true love, because love can only be built on the foundation of love. Love cannot come, this kind of love cannot come if there is not first that foundation of truth and power that gives the wide ground, as the Vedas may put it, the wide ground in which this true love, this kind of love, can find its play. So this, I think, is roughly what I talked about. I just quoted the letters on yoga. Last year, I think I did a talk on the double foundation of yoga, which concerns the psychic love. And Sri Aurobindo says that the divine love is that which comes from above, poured down from the divine oneness, is Ananda on the being. Psychic love is a form taken by the divine love in the human being, according to the need and possibilities of the human consciousness. And this love, Sri Aurobindo emphasizes, is the central love, bhakti, surrender, giving everything, a sight within that sees always clearly what is spiritually right or wrong and automatically rejects the latter. A movement of entire consecration and dedication of all in one to the mother. And I always thought, and I think that the second statement describing the psychic love is as good as any a summary of the life of Christ, a central love, bhakti, surrender, giving everything. I mean, that surely characterized the life of Christ recorded in the Gospels, right? And that is the kind of love, especially psychic love, I would say, that he has come to bring, but not, of course, ignoring the transcendent aspect and the cosmic oneness aspect. So the cardinal importance of the highest forms of love in all its variety, as exemplified in the person of Jesus, but unfortunately much less so in his followers, is a central and continuing contribution of Christianity to the spiritual future of the world. Indeed, this love is for the future. So moving on is that Christ did not put this love only in heaven. So a caricature of what Christianity is a kind of cosmic insurance policy where you believe in Christ and after that you are saved from the fires of eternal damnation and you can zoom to heaven forever after that. I mean, that's actually the turn off I had when I was a young teenager. So I was attracted to Christ, but very, very repulsed by this idea that God throw people into hell and burn forever. And somehow if you believe in him, you end up there in heaven. I mean, it sounds like a very strange God, but whatever it might be, I mean, of course, having said all that, that corresponds to something, an aspect of truth. But that's not really what I think we want to talk about today. Instead, we want to talk about love and the body. Because in this very famous saying that's repeated in millions of churches throughout the world, especially the Catholic and Orthodox churches, is these lines, which is again immeasurably profound. Even today, I would dare to say nobody fully know what they mean. Yeah, no human at least. While they were eating, Jesus took bread, gave thanks, and broke it, and gave it to his disciples, saying, "Take and eat. This is my body." Then he took a cup, gave thanks, offered it to them, saying, "Drink from it, all of you. This is my blood of the new covenant, which is poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins. I tell you, I will not drink from this fruit of the vine from now on until that day when I drink it new with you in my Father's kingdom." So again, these words have inspired reams of theologians over the centuries. There's a kind of inexhaustible dimension to such words, which clearly did not come from the mind. And it's made all the more poignant, obviously, because of the moment in which it's done. This is the Last Supper, of course. We were just going to focus mainly on the first line, "Take and eat, this is my body." So Christ was handing out ordinary bread, the kind of Passover bread. Okay, that a Jewish the most important the great Jewish feast of the Passover, where he's handing out bread, normal bread, to his disciple in the sacred meal. And he's pointing to the bread and just saying, "This is my body." Yeah, the divine's body. This is the divine, in a sense. He's pointing at a piece of bread and saying that. And more so, he's asking them to eat it. So we just ponder this scene. As I say, this is an exercise in mythos, not in logos, not in reasoning mind. What is he doing here? So he's handing himself to his disciples in the form of matter, and is asking the disciple for this most closest of relationship to eat that sacred matter, to become one with that sacred matter, to not despise that sacred matter. And in that very act, that matter becomes love. That matter becomes love in a way. I mean, that's how poor human words can convey it. But certainly down the centuries, I mean, Christians of all kinds have always understood what we call the Eucharist as the handing out of Christ himself in the form of matter. Nobody can fully understand what that even means, but that's what it is, apparently. And much ink has been spilled on what it really means. So this is one, I would say this is one of the key contributions, and it echoes the mother's story right at the beginning, right? The divine love descended straight from the Lord into matter and began to awaken what was involved there. You can practically visualize Christ handing out bread, love handing out bread, making the bread love to awaken his disciples, is it not? And that is the sacred significance. That is something that's inexhaustible still, and we have barely, as the church or as a spiritual community, whether it's Christians or otherwise, began to realize the full significance of what it really means. Because if in the caricature of what Christianity is, it's a cosmic insurance policy, so you dump everything, your body, and life cannot make it, and then finally you go to heaven. I mean, but that is very far, if you really think about it, from what is being conveyed here, right? Because it's saying that right here, the matter is sacred. The matter can be a vessel of the highest love. And interestingly, in Christianity, is one of the spiritual traditions which makes it clear, even though again in the caricature it's often forgotten, that the transformation of the whole creation that we talk about, is a new heaven and a new earth. This is from the words of St. John in the Apocalypse, the last book of the Bible. Then I saw a new heaven and new earth. For the first heaven and the first earth has passed away, and there was no longer any sea. I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God. See, coming down out of heaven, prepared as a bride, beautifully dressed for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, "Look, God's dwelling place is now among the people, and he will dwell with them." So the Hebrew term is Shekinah, right? The presence. And notice this is a movement of descent to earth, of the descent of the divine principle to earth. And there is no ambiguity that the earth itself, this earth, will be renewed. So it is a truly sad caricature that certain forms of Christian living has made life itself to be a trivial of tears and that kind of thing. I mean, there is, again, a truth to it, but it seems like always it has, Christ, should we say, has always been looking towards the transformation of the earth. And it's more the coming of the earth, that of heaven to the earth, that we really need to look for. And so, of course, then we bring on to the mother, who is always present in Christianity from the beginning, primarily in the form of the Virgin Mary, of course. This is a beautiful picture of her, supposedly, that was miraculously imprinted by the Virgin herself in Mexico 500 years ago. In the full painting, you can see many, many symbolic representations, how she's wearing the gown star, standing with the sun behind her back. But the mother always represents a form of Shekinah, that means a presence that's embedded deep within matter, a kind of pure essence of love that touches matter, that emanates from matter, as the first story says, right? How love itself plunges down into the darkness in the first time to redeem the fallen creation. And that is actually present in Catholic Christianity in particular, in Orthodox Christianity, less so in Protestant churches, but she's there. And I think that brings us nicely, actually, to my last point. So this idea of sacred matter, of the descent, of the motherhood that presides like a mother bird over matter, that, by the way, is citing from the prophet Isaiah, an ancient Hebrew prophet, is this continuous idea, not just once or twice, but in a few key parts of the history of the Jewish people, which leads on to the life of Christ. This idea of the coming of the divine fire, the spirit above, down into heaven. Just now we saw in the Apocalypse of St. John, the descent of the New Jerusalem. And we see it again and again, actually. It's a recurring motif. So the first time by the descent of the divine fire onto the tabernacle. The tabernacle, maybe I'll explain more later. And the divine presence falling onto the temple of Solomon. And of course, in the great coming of the Holy Spirit after Christ ascended, what we call the Pentecost. And in the final descent, the fourth descent, perhaps we call it the fourth descent of the New Jerusalem to totally transform the earth. So there are many, many significance to this, but I'll probably take up just one strand, which is this union of faith and sacred works that prepares the ground for the descent. And that is, I think, something very important in the Christian tradition that will be a contribution to the future. So to talk about the first two instances, for those who may not be so familiar, the Ark of the Covenant is actually this sacred chest, shall we say, that contains the law of Moses, which is built by an anointed worksman called Bezalel. His name is known, and I think I quoted it. So in the Hebrew scriptures, it's saying the Lord said to Moses, "See, I've chosen Bezaliel, son of Uri, the son of Hur, of the tribe of Judah, and I filled him with the Spirit of God, with wisdom, with understanding, with knowledge, and with all kinds of skills, to make artistic designs for work in gold, silver, and bronze, to cut and set stones, to work in wood, and to engage in all kinds of crafts. Moreover, I've appointed Oholiab, son of Ahisamach, of the tribe of Dan, to help him. Also, I've given ability to all the skilled workers to make everything I've commanded you. So it's interesting that in the scripture, for both the Temple of Solomon and the Ark of the Covenant, the craftspeople who made them are actually named and greatly honored. Huram is the chief craftsman for the Temple of Solomon, even though we call it the Temple of Solomon. It's actually the architect, and the master craftsman is actually named. And the person who crafted the Ark of the Covenant is also named. There is, of course, a significance to that. In other words, God honors craftspeople. And I think all of us know who Christ did not come as a king. Christ came as a carpenter's son. So actually, this picture is a picture of Christ being trained by his father Joseph in the art of carpentry. So Christ is a king, but his first occupation is a carpenter. He makes benches, he makes chairs. So it's quite interesting that in the Christian tradition, and of course it dates from the Jewish tradition, there is this very high place given to craftsmanship, to technology, shall we say, to people who make things with their hands, to artistry. These people are named. In fact, these people are said to be given the Spirit of God himself, a divine consciousness, so that they are able to do whatever they are doing. It is, as we say in Sri Aurobindo's words, should we say, is the Mahasaraswati aspect, right? Who gives skills in works. And the Christian tradition, the Jewish tradition has always recognized that skill in works is a sacred thing. But beyond even that, how is that linked to the descent? The fact is that it's a collaboration between the priest king, either Solomon perhaps, or Moses perhaps, and the craftsman that facilitates the descent. So clearly Bezaliel and his team has to build the Ark of the Covenant first, right? And to set up the tabernacle, and which is a tent, and so on and so forth, before the presence can come. Of course, Moses and Aaron, and we will have to also participate. The leader and the priest and also have to participate, but the craftspeople play a very important role. Work, in other words, is sacred. Work with one's hands, work on matter in particular, work on stone, in wood, work that shapes the matter is sacred. That is the spiritual, very obvious spiritual teaching behind it. So when the Temple of Solomon is built, the fire of God filled the Temple of Solomon after Solomon's prayer. But who built the temple? It's Huram and his team, right? With all the materials that are shipped in from Lebanon and all over the place. It is matter. There are sculptors, there are carpenters, there are all sorts of craftspeople who built in matter, that built. So is it a coincidence that Christ came as carpenter? I really don't think so, because he is both the craftsman and the king and the priest. He unites all three in one, which is why he fulfilled all three. And he started his life building in matter up till he was, 30 years old. Perhaps he was a carpenter actually, building with his own hands. Yeah, tables, chairs, different kinds of things in wood, in stone, perhaps. So there is that spiritual teaching that work can be sacred, especially work that is close to matter. Yeah. And I think clearly this is extremely important in the future, and it aligns extremely well with the high place given the Karma Yoga in Sri Aurobindo, which all of us know about. That turning away from the world, despising matter, is a huge mistake. That the true descent, the true coming of love into matter can only come when we are humble enough to work with our hands on the most humble of works, in stone, in wood, in mud. And finally, we come to this idea that if matter is sacred and that the body is the vessel for the fulfillment, we know, of course, that in Christianity, we talk about the resurrected body. It's not a resurrected spirit, it's a resurrected body. Yeah. Here is a painting, and there are many, many such paintings of the disciples feeling the body of Christ, of in fact eating fish with him and things like that. So he ate a fish in front of his disciples to show that, I have a body, just like you. But of course, it's not a normal kind of body anymore. But this body has a deeper significance because in the Christian tradition, the body is the church, is the community itself. And that is, I think, the last point, which comes from Judaism, actually. In fact, if there is some Jewish practitioner who is at the same time a follower of Sri Aurobindo, I think it would be a very, very interesting talk, because many of these things are inherited from the Jewish tradition. The very remarkable people, the Jewish people, who over 1,000 years forged a very remarkable strand of spirituality, a whole line of prophets that culminated in the avatar, in Christ. Yeah. And so whether it's the Jewish or the Christian tradition, it is a belief in a collective realization. That means it's not a realization by one guy in the mountains somewhere zooming off into high heaven, but it is a community, a whole community. If we return all the way to the saying at the beginning, love one another as I have loved you, that love leads to oneness, oneness with each other, oneness with God in the transcendent, cosmic, and individual aspect. It is not a otherworldly kind of realization. It is a collective, community-based realization. That has always been quite central. It has led to many caricatures, of course, of crusades and religious wars of this church versus that church, of Christians versus Islam and things like that. Yeah. But at its heart, it was about a collective realization. Christ's body is the church, is matter at the same time. So that has always been understood. Ask any Christian who has read the Bible at least once, or some parts of the Bible, he can tell you that. But why is it so significant to the future? It's because, of course, integral yoga or Sri Aurobindo's vision is also a collective realization. It is, in fact, he made it clear that's what's so special about the supramental descent, is that it makes possible a collective realization. That if the supermind do not come, a truly collective realization is impossible. You can have individuals, perhaps, maybe even individually supramentalized beings, perhaps, but you cannot have a collective of supramental beings. It's impossible. Yeah, and any collective realization has always failed up to this point because of all sorts of reasons, collective obstacles, and so on and so forth. But from the beginning, the Christian tradition at its best has always believed in the collective realization, nothing else. And so it's the coming of the New Jerusalem, an entire city, if you recall, down. It's not the zooming off like a rocket ship of people into the high heavens. It is the coming of a community, a new community, a new earth and a new heaven. And that is kept quite central. So I would say that Sri Aurobindo's teachings awakens, I would say, whether directly through spiritual influence or maybe through intellectual exchange even, these aspects of Christianity that is exceedingly important for the future, whether it's the psychic love that leads on to the cosmic and the transcendent, whether it's the sacredness of matter, whether it is the sacredness of work, especially of manual work, of work that touches matter, that needs and shapes matter, or whether it is this idea of the divine body, the collective realization, these four aspects. Sri Aurobindo awakens the church, shall we say, to these things, which has been there. It's not like it's not there. It's very obviously there. You show this talk to any Christians, I would dare say they agree that these four things are in the scriptures, are in church tradition. But how far have they been realized? How far have they been incarnated? Is the big question for the future. So to end, I would say this focus on love, matter, social transformation is obviously important. It will play a huge role. Leaning out to other things, like what I talked about in past talks, in the coming age of mental subjectivism, which is a collective realization, it clearly is important. Of science and technology breaching matter and the subtle realms, I mean, there's clearly a lot of connection to it. Not least is the fact that the greater the love, the safer the transformation. And also something I have been delving into in my school, in my work, and at home. I have been experimenting with lots of AI work, and coming to increasingly believe that AI can prepare the receptivity of matter. It is a kind of craftsmanship, a kind of shaping and burning of matter, literally. What it will lead to, I am honestly not sure. Whether it will lead to an age of spiritual machines, whether it will make matter more receptive to the light, I mean, I do not know. It can go greatly wrong, like I was talking about Western transhumanism, right, and some of its weird strengths. But at the same time, yeah, it has the potential. It is the craftsmen of today. If we can build like Bezalia, that great Jewish craftsman built, that means inspired by God. Can we build inspired by God to make craftsmanship a divine work? Then I think a lot of things, a lot of wind doors can open up to bring the light into matter. So as we end, I'd like to return all the way to the beginning, to this picture about how love descended right at the beginning into the darkness, hiding in matter. But the day has already come when this sleeping Godhead of love is awakening within matter. That's what the mother saw right at the beginning also. She is awakening in the heart of matter. And if Christians, I suppose, embrace Christ more completely, remember these four aspects, which has always been there from the beginning, from the depths of the Jewish tradition running into the life of Christ, it prepares this awakening, this bursting forth of love and light to conquer the darkness, the fallen darkness that was there, but is fading away. Okay, so I'll end the talk here and maybe we can take some questions now.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your presentation. It was wonderful and comprehensive. It has this kind of idea of transformation of matter by the presence of the Spirit, where Jesus represents that, presence, the Son of God, the only Son of God, as the psychic being involved in this manifestation and growth. And that's why he is the only Son of God, because psychic being is the only representative, direct emanation of the Father. And only through me you can come to my Father, he says. Yeah? And I am in the heart of every man. All this, if you put together, you will see that, that beautiful picture you presented. Before we start with questions, maybe I would also would like to re-emphasize this idea of the psychic and its connection with the body, which Sri Aurobindo discovered in his yoga. Then when he came to the highest heights of consciousness, he saw that the supramental realms could not be connected to the material because there was a gap between. And that gap could not be crossed until the mother came And when the mother arrived, he saw the bridge, the golden bridge, the psychic presence. And that psychic presence could connect the spirit and matter and could transform directly the matter. And so this idea of transformation of the matter is actually connected with the psychic. Psychic is the agent. It is that one which makes this food of the divine matter, making food of the divine, of his body. There are also other indications which are very powerful, that is liberty, equality, and fraternity, where Sri Aurobindo says that between liberty and equality there is a gap which can be crossed and reconciled only by fraternity. That very psychic being in us, that love within us, can reconcile between our freedom of will, liberalism, and socialism, so to say, socialistic tendencies. So, and here we have also the solution in the love, in the psychic presence. So in that sense, of course, Christianity is a very powerful agent and may have, as Mother says, she was meditating upon Christianity and she said that Christianity has a future. It is needed for the future work. So in a way, it's an amazing statement. So thank you so much, Jared. This was very enlightening and beautiful for all of us to reconsider, to recapture the foundations of Christianity in the spiritual sense. And there are a few more questions here, and I think Radhe would voice them up for you. Thank you.
Sure, thank you, Jared. I'll just go ahead and take the couple of questions in the sequence, and anybody else that has questions for him, please post in the Q&A box. So the first one is, and I don't know if you can see these in the Q&A, but I'll read it out for everybody. Are Sri Aurobindo and the mother both educated in the Western Christian tradition, not much more influenced by this tradition than me Aurobindonians and Aurovillians realize, and even they themselves realized? The linear thinking of Aurobindo towards a final fulfillment of humanity is a Western and not an Eastern concept. The same applies to the sanctity of the body. You want to comment on that, Jared?
Well, I mean, it's I mean, I don't want to comment on whether people believe or not believe that. I mean, clearly some believe that Sri Aurobindo and the mother is, I mean, are there people who believe that Sri Aurobindo and the mother is not a synthesis of East and West? Perhaps there are some, but I mean, they obviously are. But perhaps the implicit question is, how influenced are they by the West, I suppose? We know Sri Aurobindo is very much familiar with the Bible. The mother, I mean, to be frank, their relationship with Christianity as a social religion is quite complex. But I think that's why I said at the beginning we're talking about mythos and not logos here. But I think on the plane they were moving, they were touching things that Christ also touched. I think that is the real point of connection there. That's why I was going back to things like the sacredness of matter, the psyche, the love, which are the primary things. So to me, it's not, if the implicit question is whether they are influenced on the external form by Christianity and all. I mean, the obvious answer is that. And externally, they seem to be much more influenced by Indian religion. That ought to be obvious if you just take a look at what Sri Aurobindo wrote, right? How many volumes on the Bhagavad Gita, the Upanishad, the Vedas. There's no book on the commentary of the Bible, definitely. But I think that may not be the correct way to look at it, because the essence is what they touch. If you get too caught up with the external, I know the difficulty, because as I said, this is my own real life journey. I will not be talking about it. One has to go beyond the external and touch more the essence.
Thank you. Thank you, Jared. And the other one, Q&A box, is more of a comment than a question. A very interesting book is A Follower of Christ and a Disciple of Sri Aurobindo, a correspondence between the great Christian sage B.D. Griffith and Sethna, and of course are the apparitions of the Holy Mother in Medjugorje, very revealing and enlightening. Don't know if you're familiar with that book or have any comments.
I read that book 20 years ago, so I can't much remember it, but the thing is that the two of them were, I don't know, the impression I got from the book then, but that's so long ago, was the two of them were not connecting very much. Because one is not practicing the other. Truly, to have a dialogue this kind, we need to be one as in a much deeper sense. Yeah, so it's really you need to practice both in some synthetic fashion. That's all I can say. Which, because clearly the two men did not practice each other's path. They were discoursing with each other on a certain plane, but both are great men in their own way, but they were not practicing each other's path. And that's why in the end, they agree to disagree. I believe that was the end of the book, but that was 2 decades ago. So that's why I remember that they just broke off kind of correspondence. So yeah, so it wasn't very enlightening for me, to be honest, 20 years ago, because yeah, I think there's no easy answer to anyone who's called to walk in this path, because it's much easier, to be frank, to be a Hindu, however defined, and to practice integral yoga. To be honest, is probably much easier. To be a Christian of some committed sense and to try to practice Sri Aurobindo teachings is another ballgame. It's something where a lot of, as I say, experiential work is needed. Because there is no easy community to support you. There is no ready-made intellectual stuff to support you either. Yeah, so yeah, unfortunately, so that's one of the reasons why books like that were not very helpful for me. To be honest, you need to find your own answers. Maybe later, much later, I'm talking about maybe many decades or centuries ahead, you will be easier. In that, the supermind is more established, spirituality is easier, and there will be people like me who has walked this path, opening up the way, perhaps. Yeah, so yeah, but right now it's not, it's difficult because of all this.
Yeah, and the person that asked that comment agreed, they did not connect very well. So.
Yeah.
And if any other questions, I just wanted to make a comment too, if you don't mind. I don't know, you were going to say something, Vladimir?
Yeah, I had a question about the origin of Jesus. There are some theories, new theories, that he came from Kashmir, and they even found his tomb there, that he came back after crucifixion. What do you think about all those theories and connection to India?
I think it's clear to me that Christ is the crown of Israel, not of India. As speaking as someone who has some understanding of Indian traditions, as Vladimir surely knows, I go somewhat deep, not deep as him, of course, into Indian tradition. So I have some understanding of how Indian traditions look like. And I could say strongly that Christ is the crown of Israel. He's not the crown of India. I'm not putting it across in an exclusive way, I shall convert you kind of way, of course. I'm putting it as in the tree of spirituality that he belongs to. In all his actions and words, he is the fulfillment of Israelite spirituality in every single way possible. That means he's much closer to the Kabbalah or to the Old Testament spirituality than anything you can find in the Upanishads or the Bhagavad Gita. So I don't think there's any point about saying he came geographically from India, even if he's born in India, even if he is clearly the crown of Israel in so many ways. In fact, all the 4 main aspects I talked about, whether it's love or community or the descent of the spirit, or has actually all have their roots in Israelite spirituality, and which the Jewish people themselves even though many of them rejected Christ, they developed quite fully in the Kabbalah, interestingly. So, yeah, so I don't see much credence actually to try to do this kind of thing. It's like those people who claim that Bhagavad Gita is inspired by the Gospels. You try to tell that to the Hindus. It's spoken by people who neither understand the Bhagavad Gita or the Gospels very well. Let's put it this way. Okay. Yeah, so if we really live out the path of Christ and delve deep into the Jewish and Christian tradition it comes from, and see the alignment between the two, there is no doubt in my mind he was meant to fulfill the dreams of Israel, yeah, and to bring forth that unique spirituality to the world. So Israel and India represent those two poles of the spiritual world that is coming together, yeah. So to conflict that is actually an injustice because both streams are diverse and they bring their own great fruits. So that's my answer, I guess.
Yeah, there are some similarities between the mythologically between his life and life of Krishna. You can see the same prophecy that the king will be born and then the children were killed. So you could see something which is kind of inbuilt in the archetypal thinking of our search for spirituality in general. And most probably that is what is common for all of us, for all human beings, I guess. Our original search for the truth, So, yeah, there are many interesting things, but of course time is limited. And thank you again for this beautiful exposition. It's very needed. We needed this part much because Christianity plays a huge role in the societies in the West, in the East, everywhere, and may play more spiritual role in the future. Thank you.
Yeah, and I just would like to make a comment here before we close and get your thoughts on it, Gerald. You mentioned Maha Saraswati and this perfection in skills and the sacredness of working with matter. In The Mother, the book Sri Aurobindo wrote and the Q&As that followed, he mentions, or somebody had asked, are these the only four powers, Maheshwari, Mahakali, Mahalakshmi, and Mahasaraswati? And Sri Aurobindo said, no, there are others, and the one most important is love. But humanity isn't ready for it yet. And so it dawned on me as you were speaking, clearly you mentioned it's going to take a supramental to really bring out that divine love. But it also seems to imply that until we've perfected the last of those four Shaktis, Mahasaraswati, which embodies obviously the previous three, and Mahasaraswati being exactly what you said, working with matter, matter as sacred, implying karma yoga. Until we've perfected that, then somehow that's the gateway perhaps to love also. In addition to the supramental. So I just wanted to get your thoughts on that, Jared.
You said it extremely well already. So it links clearly to this idea of sacred works. So Mahasaraswati has to be established first. Yeah, sacred works has been done in its perfection before Radha. Radha is the Maharada aspect, that is love. The true love can come. If not, matter will break. Completely explode. Basically, it cannot hold power. Yeah. So what is spoken of in the Mother that Sri Aurobindo is the Mother that all four aspects must reach its perfection before Maharada can come is very much aligned, I think, to the deepest ideas of the Christian tradition. But of course, I think Sri Aurobindo brought it across very, very clearly, which is what I tried to say, that I think Sri Aurobindo's teachings and writings really brings out certain aspects in Christianity that is actually very, very needed for the future. It's there, but then it's often forgotten, buried, whatever. Yeah. So I can say, okay.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you so much, I guess. So
Thank-
maybe.
Thank you. Thank you, Jared, so very much. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Radhe. Okay, so see you then.
Namaste.
Thank you. Namaste.
Namaste.
See you then.